All right, welcome. If you are getting ready for the UGC NET or JRF English exam, you know exactly what I'm talking about when I say the English Renaissance. It feels like this giant mountain you have to climb, right? It's so important, but wow, it can be a lot. Well, today we're putting on our hiking boots and we are going to conquer that mountain together. And listen, I totally get it. Trying to get a handle on 200 years of literary revolution, from the Tudors all the way to the Puritans, it can honestly feel like total chaos. You've got poets, playwrights, religious upheaval, all thrown into one big, confusing mix. But that's exactly why we're here. Think of this session as your roadmap. We're going to take all that chaos and organize it into a crystal clear guide. We're talking the must-know authors, the works you have to remember, and the big ideas. So you can walk into that exam feeling totally prepared and confident. So here's our game plan. First, we'll lay the foundations. Then we'll hit the Elizabethan peak. Think Spenser and the university wits. After that, we have to tackle the genius himself, Shakespeare. Then we'll see how things got a little darker on the Jacobean stage, unpack a major split between two schools of poetry, and then wrap it all up with a quick fire practice session to get you exam ready. Okay, let's dive in. First things first, the foundations. We're talking about the period from 1485 to 1558. This is really where it all kicks off. It's that moment where the medieval world starts to fade and the modern world begins to take shape. All thanks to some massive, game-changing shifts in technology, religion, and of course, politics. And just look at how these events domino into each other. In 1476, Caxton's printing press arrives, and suddenly knowledge isn't just for the church anymore. Then, in 1485, Henry VII brings some much-needed political stability. The Reformation and the Act of Supremacy completely rewire England's identity. And all of this creates the perfect environment for literary bombshells like Thomas More's Utopia and the very first English tragedy in blank verse, Gorbo Duck. Seriously, every single point on this timeline is a potential exam question. Okay, exam alert. When you think early Renaissance poetry, you need to think of these two guys. First, you have Sir Thomas Wyatt. He's the one who goes to Italy and brings the sonnet back to England. But then you have the Earl of Surrey. He takes that Italian model and transforms it into the English sonnet. You know, the 3 quatrains and a final couplet that Shakespeare would later make famous. Oh, and he also invented blank verse. The takeaway here is simple. Without Wyatt and Surrey, the greatest writers of the era just wouldn't have had the tools they needed. So, with those foundations firmly in place, England just explodes into its cultural peak under Queen Elizabeth I. Between 1558 and 1603, the whole nation was just buzzing with this incredible energy. It was fueled by humanist learning, that's that renewed focus on human potential in the classics, plus a huge wave of national pride, especially after beating the Spanish Armada. This was, without a doubt, the golden age. And right at the heart of this age is Edmund Spenser. His massive epic, The Faerie Queene, is basically a love letter to the era's virtues. Now, take a good look at this slide, because for the exam, you absolutely need to know these connections. Book 1 is all about holiness, and that's the Red Cross Knight. Book 2 is Temperance with Sir Guyon. You get the idea. Commit this table to memory. And don't you forget the special 9-line stanza he invented for it, the Spenserian stanza. Now, before Shakespeare could become, well, Shakespeare, a group of brilliant, college-educated playwrights had to basically build the professional stage for him. We call them the university wits. You've got Thomas Kyd, who pretty much invents the whole revenge tragedy genre. You've got John Lyly with his super witty prose style called Euphuism. And then, of course, there was Christopher Marlowe. His mighty line of blank verse and his larger-than-life heroes like Dr. Faustus, they just completely changed the game for English drama. This group quite literally set the stage for what was to come. Which brings us to the man himself. Look, William Shakespeare wasn't just another talented writer. He was like a master synthesizer. He took every single genre that was floating around at the time, comedy, history, tragedy, you name it, and he didn't just master it, he perfected it. For your exam, thinking about his career in these 4 distinct stages is going to be incredibly helpful. First, he's in his experimental phase, kind of imitating the university wits in plays like Richard III. Then he hits his period of mastery, giving us those amazing comedies like Twelfth Night. That's followed by his deep dive into the tragic period, which of course gives us the big 4, Hamlet, Othello, King Lear, and Macbeth. And he finishes up with the late romances like The Tempest, which are all about forgiveness and a little bit of magic. Trust me, knowing this chronology is a lifesaver for any sequence-based questions. But, you know, no golden age can last forever.
After Queen Elizabeth died in 1603, the whole mood of the country started to shift. Under King James I, political corruption felt like it was everywhere, and this sense of disillusionment just crept in. The literature of this Jacobean era totally reflects that change, trading in all that optimism for a new fascination with satire, cynicism, and some real psychological darkness.
Shakespeare's great contemporary, and let's be honest, his great rival, was Ben Jonson. And Jonson was championing a totally different kind of play. See, Jonson was a classicist. He loved the order and rules of ancient Greece and Rome. His big innovation was something called the comedy of humors. It's based on this old medical theory where each character is just completely driven by a single obsessive trait, their humor, like the all-consuming greed you see in Volpone. His sharp, satirical style was a world away from Shakespeare's work. And tragedy? Oh, it took an even darker turn. The Jacobean stage basically became a theater of blood. John Webster's The Duchess of Malfi is the perfect example. It's famous for its morbid, almost gothic atmosphere and for the character of Bosola. He's the classic malcontent, the cynical, disillusioned guy who's always commenting on the corrupt court. Yeah, these plays really dove headfirst into the darkest parts of human nature. So as we slide into the Caroline Age, that's the reign of Charles I, starting in 1625, the political tensions that are about to erupt into the Civil War are really starting to bubble up. And this deep, growing division in society, it was perfectly mirrored in the poetry of the time, which split right down the middle into two very different, very opposed schools of thought. And this right here is a classic exam topic. On one side, you have the metaphysical poets, with John Donne as their leader. Their work was intellectual, sometimes a little rough around the edges, and famous for using these wild comparisons called metaphysical conceits. On the other side, you have the Cavalier poets, the sons of Ben Jonson. They were supporters of the king who wrote these smooth, polished, musical poems about love, honor, and seizing the day. Carpe diem. And if you ever need the perfect example of a metaphysical conceit, this is it. This is the one. Here, John Donne is comparing the souls of two lovers to the two legs of a drawing compass. It is a startling, brainy, and totally unexpected comparison, and that is the absolute hallmark of the metaphysical style. Standing apart from both of those schools was the era's other undisputed giant, John Milton. Honestly, the best way to understand his career is to break it into these three phases. He starts out writing these beautiful lyrical poems like Lycidas. Then, during the Civil War, he pivots and dedicates himself to writing political prose, most famously Areopagitica, his powerful defense of free speech. And then, finally, after he'd gone blind and the monarchy was back, he wrote his three monumental epics, including the greatest epic poem in the English language, Paradise Lost. Okay, wow, we have covered a massive amount of ground. We've built the timeline, we've mapped out all the major players. So now let's make sure those key facts are really locked in. It's time for a little practice session to connect all these dots for your exam. Ready? Okay, here's your first exam alert question. I want you to think all the way back to our foundation timeline. Which of these plays was the very first to use blank verse on the tragic stage? Take a second to think. And the answer is C, Gorboduc. This is one of those crucial firsts that examiners just love to ask about. It was performed way back in 1562, and it set the stage, literally, for Marlowe and Shakespeare. This is a must-know date and title. All right, let's try another one. This famous quote perfectly captures the spirit of one of those two poetic schools we talked about. Who wrote it? That would be Richard Lovelace, a textbook Cavalier poet. And get this, he wrote those lines while he was in prison for supporting the king. It's the perfect embodiment of that Cavalier ideal that your mind and your spirit can be free, even if your body is locked up. And just like that, there you have it. We've taken 200 years of literary history and turned it from chaos into a clear, structured guide for your exam. We've seen how humanism put the focus on the individual, how the Reformation shaped the very language we use, and how classicism gave writers new forms to play with. So the final question I'm going to leave you with is this. When you look back at all of it, which of these powerful forces do you think has left the deepest mark on the literature we still read and study today? Thanks so much for joining me, and best of luck with your preparation.